Hi, my name is Colin Duggan. I'm CEO of BG Networks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Roman Lysecki, CTO for BG Networks.
And this is our bi-weekly podcast where we cover current events related to medical device cybersecurity. And I think we have a pretty interesting episode this week where we're going to save you time by, in about 20 minutes, summarizing what is new in the FDA guidance update. It's a finalized guidance that came out a couple of weeks ago. The headline is that the FDA clearly made a connection to the law, the statutory requirements for cybersecurity, what's known as Section 524B. Roman, any comments on that?
No. Let's get into the details, and we can talk through what's new and what you need to know about.
Okay, great. Roman, can you see my screen here?
I can see it.
Okay, perfect. So this is the journey of 524B. 524B is the legal requirement in the FD&C Act for cybersecurity and medical devices, and it started back in December 2022. This is the essentially the act of Congress here in a bill called the Omnibus Bill, and there's a Fedora section 3305, ensuring cybersecurity in medical devices, which has Section 524B, which is what most people commonly refer to in terms of medical device cybersecurity legal requirements. In March of 2023, the FDA came out with their refuse to accept policy, basically had 524B verbatim in it. A year later, they added this document, or came out with this document, which is draft. And basically, it has the commentary and guidance on meeting these legal obligations. And like they said in this document, they were going to add a Section 7 to the updated guidance that came out a couple of weeks ago. What's in here is basically the same in this Section 7 as what they put in the March document, except for a few clarifications.
Yeah, and so there was several different pieces of information. If you wanted the complete picture around this, you had 524B, you had the refuse to accept policy, you had the September 23 Premarket Cybersecurity guidance, you had the draft select updates. And what this new one is doing is pulling that all together into one guidance document. And I think that's where one of the advantages of having the update that they just provided for us.
Here is the actual language for 524B, and I think you could break it down and explain it very simply. And I've color-coded it here so you can see the text in red is the mandate that the FDA has for cybersecurity. The text in blue is the definition of a cyber device, which to me is basically a network interface on the device. And the other ways that they define it, like having cyber software and could be affected by a cyber incident, that kind of comes along. Like you can't have a network interface without software. The green is you need to have a process from the beginning of a design and through the life cycle for ensuring cybersecurity. The yellow is you need an SBOM. The purple is you need vulnerability monitoring post-market. The blue there is software updates. And the last green here is that the FDA can make changes. And 4, 5, and 6 to me hang together kind of in a very logical way, right? Because if you have an SBOM, you know what's in your software. That allows you to actually monitor for vulnerabilities in that software. And then if you find a vulnerability, you can do a software update. So putting that in to 524B makes a lot of sense to me.
In 524B, if you look at the law itself, this is very short, brief, and there's a lot of details of trying to understand what does that actually mean. And that's what the FDA guidance is trying to provide. The details go a level deeper on what this actually means, what the requirements are for that pre-market submission. And that's where we're going to get into today, is look at some of those details that they're trying to do, the clarifications around what's required.
So the majority of what's new, the vast majority, is this Section 7 in the guidance that just came out a couple of weeks ago. And like I said, it has references to all aspects of 524B. It breaks it down part by part. For example, they even break apart sentences from 524B logically so they can be commented on and guidance can be given. Most of Section 7 had already been covered in some form or fashion in the September 2023 guidance. Essentially, Sections 1 through 6 and the appendices are directly from the 2023 guidance with only very minor modifications. And really what you need to know if you're going for a pre-market submission is some clarifications to the guidance that is in this Section 7 here.
Yeah, and this is the bulk of the update that really gets into the details specifically around 524B and breaking down those details. The previous September 2023 guidance, it did have references to 524B, but not at the level of detail that we're seeing in the updated guidance. And so that's where we'll get into the details of what's new and what's interesting.
So what's in Section 7? It lists who must comply, definition of a cyber device. It's got a section on what you should be adding to your documentation. It talks about if you have a device already on the market, but you have modifications, and talks about ensuring cybersecurity. And what I put in blue here is basically the references to existing guidance and other documents. And so you can see here, it's mostly covered already. Like every section has some kind of reference to something that was existing already. And I'll just highlight Appendix 4, which is the appendix that lists all the documents that's needed for eStar in terms of cybersecurity. And in that table in Appendix 4, they refer basically to all the sections of the existing guidance. So this by itself actually connects this Section 7 to everything else that's in the document.
The other connection that they do a better job of establishing in this new guidance is the connection between pre-market and post-market. And as we look at some of the details of what's actually in there, that connection is important because it ties back to one of the original requirements of 524B, which is you need a secure product development framework that spans the complete life cycle. So that's pre-market and post-market. And in order to do a pre-market submission, you don't have to be doing all the post-market activities, but you're going to need plans for some of those that need to be included in the pre-market. So I think those are the details that will be interesting to kind of understand what that connection is. So you're planning for post-market as part of your pre-market.
So what's new? This is kind of I would say, the meat of the presentation now in terms of if you are preparing for a pre-market submission. Part A of Section 7 was actually in the guidance already in terms of who must comply, right? Or sorry, the definition of a cyber device was already in there. Who must comply, I think, was pretty straightforward also. What's new in Section B here is they define in more detail a programmable logic device, making the case that it is software, but that was already in the guidance. They provide examples of interfaces that would qualify as network connected, including USB. And then there's this documentation section where they basically say you need to put this in your post-market plans, your cybersecurity management plan document, which is one of the documents needed for eStar for a pre-market submission. It defines coordinated vulnerability disclosures and talks about a potential vulnerability could be reported from an external entity or be reported from internal within your company. which when you say coordinated vulnerability disclosure, that's kind of intuitively what comes to mind anyways. And so, for example, we had this already in our documentation, and even in the older guidance, they had referred to some standards that made this clear too. So they do put that kind of extra guidance in here and describe that here. But again, it's nothing that's really new, or, something that you wouldn't say kind of intuitively, what's required for a coordinated vulnerability disclosure program.
That coordinated vulnerability disclosure, this is one of those cases where post-market activity. So if you had looked at the FDA guidance for post-market cybersecurity requirements, they had a coordinated vulnerability disclosure in there. So they make a reference directly to the post-market guidance, and they're kind of laying out the basics of that. But this requirement already existed post-market. And again, this is one of those cases where you're seeing a stronger connection between pre-market and post-market, that they want to see what you're going to be doing post-market, to look at the plan for that, the details of it in your pre-market submission. And that needs to be in your cybersecurity management plan.
Update timelines is clarified. There's guidance in this section 7, which is, the description is new, the guidance is new. They talk about it being based on risks. They talk about a unaccepted vulnerability. Long as it's resulting in a controlled risk, you can update that on a regular schedule. So they clarify that. And that's something that should be in your cybersecurity management plan already anyways, is the schedules of updates. And they clarify that a critical vulnerability needs to be fixed ASAP, and they're relating critical vulnerabilities to uncontrolled risk, which you'd want to do anyways. Again, I think it's intuitive, or kind of implied in the previous guidance.
And this risk-based approach. This is where threat and risk assessment, threat modeling, risk assessment is part of the broader secure product development framework. Anytime you have new vulnerabilities that are discovered, you want to use your threat model and risk assessment. You want to evaluate the risk from that. And that risk will end up being a controlled risk or an uncontrolled risk. And now it's that framework that you have in place can guide you of, okay, do I need to do this right now? If it's uncontrolled, yes. If it's controlled, no, you don't have to do it now. You can do it on a regular schedule. So it's kind of a common practice for development frameworks that are risk-based.
They use the interconnected thermometer example again. This time they compare it to a surgical robot, and just make the point here that, you could much more easily have an uncontrolled risk in a surgical robot versus an interconnected thermometer. So to Roman's point, you want to think about the risk when you're thinking about updates, and if you need to go off cycle from your regular software update timelines. They mention that you have to have plans and update documents throughout the life cycle of the device. And like Roman was saying, this includes threat models and risk assessment. So as new vulnerabilities and new threats arise, ideally the right thing to do is put them through your threat model and risk assessment process. Again, it tells you, what level of risk you're facing. Plus, if the FDA ever asks, it gives you a rationale to explain to them how you arrived at that conclusion.
Yeah, and a threat model is not a fixed model you do once before submission. It's a model that constantly gets updated and revised continually across the life cycle. That's the central component of doing things using risk assessment to guide when updates are needed.
In section 7, they also have a clarification of related systems. And they basically say that you need to consider the related systems in your pre-market submissions. This could be, or they define very specifically, other devices that you might control. Update servers. This is software update servers. So you do want to consider the place where your software updates reside before they're actually distributed out into the devices in the field. And you want to make sure that's secure and you want to document that you do have a plan to keep that secure. That is definitely a threat vector. If you have a server that potentially is, has some kind of accessibility over a network, you want to make sure that's secure. And even from insider threats, you want to, maybe limit the access to those update servers. Connection to hospital networks, health delivery organization networks is another related system that is talked about here in this section 7.
I think those are good examples of related systems. There may be others, right? They're not trying to list off every possible one. So the update servers, if you have a CI/CD process and some automatic deployment capability to push that to an update server that then gets pushed down to the device, well, then your CI/CD processes might also be considered related systems. So it's really trying to understand all the components that go into how things affect the medical device and take a comprehensive approach to it.
There's guidance on modifications and changes to a device that already has market access, and they give away in a path to not having to submit all the documentation that you typically would provide for cybersecurity in a new submission. They define changes that would impact security and changes that don't impact security. If it is a change that impacts security, you basically need a full set of documentation. The 12 or 13 documents need to be updated and submitted. They define that as like changes to cryptography. They mention new network interfaces or your mechanism for updating. Those would be triggers for providing kind of the full set again. But if things like sterilization that don't impact security, they also mention algorithms here, which aren't related to like, let's say network interfaces. You just refer to your previous submission. You provide some commentary about were there any critical vulnerabilities that you had to update and what the status of those vulnerabilities are. And basically, if you've remediated them or have a good plan to remediate them, and then provide an updated SBOM is all they're looking for. So it gives you this path to a shorter submission if you are making a modification to an existing device.
Yeah, and the changes that impact security, there's still a little bit of a gray area there. If you're changing your authentication mechanism entirely, okay, yes, you need to do the full submission. That impacts. You've changed a BLE pairing process, a different mode of operation that requires mutual authentication using certificates, compared to you just use it just works prior and you made a change there. That requires an update. But what if you just have a CVE reported for a cryptography library that was in your system? You didn't change the algorithms, you're just patching it to a newer version that's resolved the CVE. It technically impacts security. I don't know. It's unclear if that one's going to require a full set of documentation to do that update.
The last section of section 7 that has some new commentary from the FDA is ensuring cybersecurity. And the FDA just clarifies that if you are making a submission and there are new risks or new technologies that have emerged since the predicate device was submitted and approved, that they are going to take a deep dive. And you really need to make sure that those new risks, new vulnerabilities, are addressed. And I think when they refer to like a new risk in technology, the example they give is software. And what comes to my mind is if the software no longer is receiving updates, essentially if it's lifetime update support has ended. And so they would consider that, for example, potentially a new risk related to the technology. And they highlight, as an example, a central nursing station alarm. And if there's a new cyber threat that emerged, and that was somehow your predicate, that you need to address that new threat that had emerged, and they'll be looking for that and wanting to see that being addressed.
Yeah, and I view the new risks or vulnerabilities that devices might be exposed to. To me, that a clear example is your predicate device doesn't have a BLE interface, and now your device adds a BLE interface to talk to a smartphone app. That creates potential new vulnerabilities. So you're gonna need to address that. That's, you know, you've increased the threat surface that an attacker could target. You're going to have to do an update for it. Go through the whole process, think it through, create all the documentation for it, do the full secure product development.
One notable addition, which was great to see, that was outside of Section 7, is that ANSI AMI SW96, which is a great risk management process for cybersecurity, is mentioned in addition to TIR 57, which is really, it's the standard that's based on TIR 57. So that's it. So Roman, I got 21 past the hour, so I think we did okay. I think we hit the 20-minute mark, or close to it anyways. Do you have any other comments, Roman?
No, I think it's a good update. I find the update good in the sense that it takes information that was in multiple sources and it brings it all into a single document. So I think there's now 2 documents you need to cover pre-market and post-market. One for pre-market, one for post-market. They're all connected together. And I think with those 2 sets of document, they do a good job outlining the cybersecurity requirements needed for a medical device.
Yeah, and the 2 things that stand out to me are, you know, if you hadn't clearly defined in your cybersecurity management plan the coordinated vulnerability disclosure policy that you have, you definitely want to make sure that's written in there now. And then also this idea in your timelines for updates, you know, if it is a uncontrolled risk that is caused by a vulnerability, that you clearly talk about how you're going to update your software immediately. So those are the couple of changes I think that might be a very short takeaway from my perspective. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. You know, we show up here every couple of weeks, and if you want to get in contact with Roman and I, our LinkedIn barcodes are up on the screen, or send us an email if you'd like the slides. Also, just drop us an email. We'd be happy to send them. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.